My wife confessed my 3-year-old daughter wasn't mine, but when I turned to my family for support, my own mother and sister took her side and called me selfish, so I cut them all off and rebuilt my entire life from scratch. I'm 33 years old. I work in accounting, and there are still days when I wake up and I can't believe that my life exploded the way it did about a year and a half ago. The thing is, I found out that my wife, Michelle, had been lying to me for 3 complete years about something so huge that it basically destroyed everything I thought was my life. And when I say everything, I mean absolutely everything. I guess I should start from the beginning, or at least from the moment when everything fell apart, because what happened before that now seems to me like it was someone else's life completely. We'd been married for like 6 years when this happened, and I thought we had a pretty normal life. You know. Michelle was 30 years old, worked in marketing, and we had a 3-year-old daughter named Grace, and I adored her. Literally, that little girl was my entire world. We lived in a house we'd bought together. Nothing fancy, but it was ours, and I thought we were building something, you know what I mean? I had my routines, my job at a medium-sized accounting firm where I'd been for like 8 years. My friends, my family, everything seemed to be in place. My mom, Barbara, lived like 20 minutes from us, and we saw each other often. My sister Lauren also lived nearby with her husband. And we had those family dinners every 2 or 3 weeks where we'd all get together and have a good time. Or so I thought, at least. The night Michelle told me was completely out of nowhere, and that's what pisses me off the most to this day, that I didn't see anything coming at all. I got home from work on a normal Tuesday, like around 7 at night, I think, and Grace was already asleep because Michelle put her to bed early on weekdays. I walked into the house and Michelle was sitting on the living room couch with a face I'd never seen on her, like pale and with red eyes, like she'd been crying. And the first thing I thought was that something had happened to someone in her family or something like that. I sat down next to her and asked her what was wrong, and she stayed quiet for like a full minute, just looking at her hands. And I was already starting to get really scared. And then she just blurted it all out at once. With no preamble or anything, she just said, "3 years ago, I had an affair with a coworker, and Grace isn't your biological daughter." And I just sat there processing the words because they literally didn't make sense in my head. I don't know how long it took me to react, honestly, but I remember the first thing I said was something like, "What?" Because what I was hearing couldn't be real. And she started explaining the whole story to me, that it had been with some guy from her office named Jason. She'd never mentioned him even once in all those years, by the way, that it had lasted like 3 months. That when she found out she was pregnant, he told her he wanted nothing to do with it and that she should get an abortion, and that she decided to break up with him and tell me that the baby was mine because supposedly she loved me and wanted to stay with me. The whole time she was telling me this, I felt like I was floating outside my body or something, like I couldn't connect with what was happening. I asked her why she was telling me this now, after 3 years of lying to me every single day, and she said she couldn't take the guilt anymore, that she needed to be honest with me, and I don't know if she realized how selfish that sounded, but in that moment, I just felt like a wave of disgust washing over my entire body. I got up from the couch and went to the room where we kept the suitcases, pulled one out and started throwing clothes in without even really thinking about what I was doing. Michelle followed me and started crying and telling me she was so sorry, that we could go to therapy, that Grace needed me regardless of biology, and all those things I guess people say in these situations, but I couldn't even look at her. Every time I tried to process what she'd told me, I felt like throwing up. Literally felt my stomach churning and my hands were shaking as I folded shirts and threw them in the suitcase. All I could think was, how is it possible for someone to look you in the eye every day for 3 years knowing they're lying to you about something like this? How did she let me raise a child who wasn't even mine without telling me anything? And the worst part was thinking about Grace, because I had held her since she was born, changed her diapers, stayed up all night when she was sick, taught her to walk, and now it turned out that everything had been based on one giant lie. I grabbed my suitcase and left the house at like 9 at night, I think, and the last thing I heard was Michelle yelling at me from the door to please not leave. I got in the car, a 2019 Honda Accord we'd bought together like 2 years before, and drove around aimlessly for I don't know how long until I ended up at a hotel near the airport. It was one of those generic hotels where business executives stay when they're traveling, and I paid for a full week, right there at the front desk, because I had no idea what else to do. That night, I didn't sleep at all. Just lay in bed staring at the ceiling and replaying my entire relationship with Michelle in my head, trying to find the signs I should have seen but obviously completely missed. How didn't I notice when she was pregnant? How didn't I see any strange behavior? Was she always that good at lying, or was I just that stupid? The next morning, I blocked Michelle's number on my phone because I couldn't deal with her messages or calls. I had like 50 messages from her and about 15 missed calls when I woke up. If you can call opening your eyes after lying there without sleeping all night, waking up, and they all said basically the same thing, that she was sorry, that she loved me, that we needed to talk. But I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to hear her excuses or her justifications. I just wanted everything to disappear. The first thing I did was Google divorce lawyers in my city, and I found one named Mr. Davis, who had good reviews and seemed to specialize in complicated cases. I called him from the hotel parking lot, like at 8 in the morning, and left him a message explaining my situation and asking for an appointment as soon as possible. I also called my work and asked for a month off, which was weird because I never took more than a week at a time, but my boss must have realized something serious was happening from the tone of my voice because he approved it without asking too many questions. I think I told him something like, "I have a family emergency and I need time." And he just said, "Sure, Robert, take all the time you need." After that, I basically stayed at the hotel doing nothing for like 3 days. Just ordered delivery food and watched Netflix without really paying attention to what I was watching. And the whole time, I felt like I had a hole in my chest, like a physical emptiness that wouldn't fill up with anything. On the 4th day at the hotel, my mom called me. I don't know how she got my number. Well, she'd always had it, obviously, but I thought Michelle wouldn't have told her anything yet. But when I answered, the first thing I heard was, "Robert, what the hell is going on?" Michelle called me crying and says, "You left the house." And that's when I realized that Michelle had gone to talk to my family, probably to get them on her side before I could tell my version, which seemed super manipulative to me, but also very typical of her now that I think about it. I explained to my mom everything that had happened, the affair, the lie about Grace, everything. And I expected her to say something like, "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry," or "What a terrible situation." But instead, she was quiet for a moment and then said, "Well, that was 3 years ago, wasn't it? Everyone makes mistakes. And Grace needs her father no matter what." I couldn't believe what I was hearing, literally stood there with the phone to my ear, not knowing what to say. I told her, "Mom, she lied to me for 3 years about something fundamental. How am I supposed to trust her again?" And she started with a speech about forgiveness and about how marriage requires work and sacrifice, and how Grace was going to suffer if I divorced Michelle, and basically trying to make me feel guilty for wanting to end the relationship. I told her I couldn't talk about that right then and hung up. And like 10 minutes later, my sister Lauren called me, saying exactly the same thing as my mom, like as if they'd coordinated the speech between the two of them. Lauren was even more insistent, told me I was being selfish, that I should think about Grace first, that Michelle was devastated and remorseful, and that I was making a huge mistake by throwing my family in the trash over something that had happened so long ago. That call left me even more furious than my mom's because Lauren had always been like my ally in the family, you know? We were close. We told each other things, and now it turns out she was on the side of the person who had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I told her, "Lauren, if your husband had done the same thing to you, would you really be telling me to stay with him?" And she was quiet for a second and then said, "That's different," but didn't explain why it was different, just kept pressuring me to go back home and talk to Michelle. In the end, I told her I needed space from everyone and hung up. And after that, I stopped answering calls from my family for a while. About a week into staying at the hotel, I met with Mr. Davis at his office. He was a guy in his 50s, very professional, with a desk full of folders and a view of the city from the 12th floor of his building. I told him the whole situation, and he was the first person who didn't make me feel like I was crazy or being dramatic, just took notes and explained what my options were legally. He told me we could start the divorce process immediately. That, given that Grace wasn't biologically mine, I probably wouldn't have to pay child support, although he mentioned that could get complicated if I'd acted as a legal parent for 3 years, and that the best thing was to be clear and direct with my intentions. I signed the papers that same day, and he told me he'd take care of sending them to Michelle in the next few days. I left that meeting feeling a little better, like at least I was taking action instead of just staying paralyzed in a hotel room. But I also realized I couldn't keep living in a hotel indefinitely. I needed a more stable place to stay, while all this got resolved. My best friend Christopher, who I'd known since college, lived alone in a 2-bedroom apartment, like half an hour from where I'd lived with Michelle, and when I told him what was happening, he immediately told me to come stay with him for as long as I needed. Christopher was one of those friends who really show up when things get tough. Like he wasn't the type to judge you or give unsolicited advice, he just listened and supported you. And honestly, I don't know what I would have done without him in those days. I moved into his apartment like 2 days after seeing the lawyer, and it was weird packing up the few things I'd brought to the hotel and realizing that basically my entire life now fit in 2 suitcases. Christopher gave me the guest room and told me I could stay there as long as I wanted, that there was no rush for anything. That night we ordered pizza and sat watching an action movie that neither of us paid much attention to, but it felt good to be with someone who wasn't pressuring me to do anything or judging me for my decisions. About a week after moving in with Christopher, Michelle received the divorce papers. I wasn't there, obviously, but Christopher told me that my mom had called him because he still wasn't answering them, asking where I was, and telling him that Michelle was devastated and needed to talk to me urgently. Christopher told her I needed space, and that they should stop pressuring me. And I guess my mom didn't like that at all because after that call, things got even worse with my family. My mom started sending me text messages because I wasn't answering her calls, telling me she was disappointed in me, that she never thought I'd be the type of person who would abandon his family, that Grace asked about me every day and was confused about why Daddy didn't live with them anymore. Those messages about Grace were the ones that hurt the most. Honestly, because I did miss that little girl, even though I now knew she wasn't mine biologically. She'd been my daughter for 3 years. I'd read her bedtime stories, taken her to the park, we'd played together, and it's not like those memories disappeared just because Michelle had revealed the truth to me. But at the same time, I knew that if I kept in contact with Grace, it was going to be even harder to get out of all this. And besides, what right did I have to stay in her life when I wasn't her real father? The real father. That Jason, who'd abandoned her when Michelle told him she was pregnant, where was he in all this? Why did I have to carry the responsibility for something he'd caused? Lauren also intensified her calls and messages, increasingly aggressive and accusatory. She'd tell me things like, "Mom is doing badly because of you. Michelle is destroyed because of you. Grace is suffering because of you." And basically trying to make me feel like I was the villain of this whole situation, when literally, I was the victim of a massive lie that had lasted years. I responded to her with a long message, explaining again why I couldn't just forgive and forget, trying to make her understand that it wasn't just about the infidelity, but about the sustained lie for so long. But she answered me with something like, "You're being selfish. You only think about yourself." And after that, I stopped responding to her messages too. And then came the worst part. About 3 weeks after Michelle received the divorce papers, my mom called me late one night. It was like 11, and I answered because I thought maybe there'd been a real emergency. But no, it was just another attempt to make me change my mind about the divorce. This time she was more direct than before, told me that if I went ahead with this, she was going to cut contact with me completely, that she couldn't support someone who abandoned his family that way, and that, basically, I had to choose between my marriage or my relationship with her and Lauren. I said, "Mom, are you serious? Are you telling me you're going to disown me if I get divorced?" And she said, "I'm not saying I'm going to disown you. I'm just saying I can't be part of your life if you're going to destroy yours this way." I hung up that call and started crying for the first time since all this had started. It wasn't a quiet cry, but one of those where you can't breathe right and your chest physically hurts. And Christopher came into the room because he'd heard the noise and sat down with me without saying anything. Just put a hand on my shoulder and stayed there. After like half an hour, I managed to calm down and told him what my mom had said, and he just shook his head and said, "Your mom is wrong. You're not doing anything wrong." And those simple words helped me more than any elaborate speech anyone could have given me. The next few days were like being on autopilot. I'd get up, have breakfast, Stay in the apartment watching TV or browsing the internet without really processing anything. Have lunch, keep not doing much, have dinner, and go to sleep. Christopher worked from home sometimes, so he'd keep me company, but other times he'd go out to his office and I'd be left alone with my thoughts, which wasn't always good because my mind would go to dark places. I thought a lot about why Michelle had done what she did, if she'd really ever loved me, or if everything had been a lie from the beginning. If Jason knew he had a daughter out there somewhere, or if he cared. And especially, I thought about what kind of person I was, that even my own mother wasn't willing to support me in the worst moment of my life. Mr. Davis called me like a month after sending the divorce papers to tell me that Michelle hadn't signed them yet and was asking for time to reconsider things. I told him there was nothing to reconsider, that I wanted the divorce period, and he assured me that eventually we'd have to go to court if she kept not signing, but that could take time. He also mentioned that Michelle had said she wanted to meet with me to talk, without lawyers or anything, just the two of us, and that supposedly she had important things to tell me. At first I told him no, that I didn't see the point of talking to her. But after thinking about it for a few days, I decided that maybe I needed to hear what she had to say to be able to close this chapter completely, you know? Like as a final conversation to understand the why of everything, even though it wasn't going to change my decision. I told Michelle, through the lawyer, because I still wasn't talking to her directly, that I'd agree to meet with her in a neutral place, and we ended up agreeing to meet at a cafe that was like halfway between where I was with Christopher and where she still lived in our old house. The day of the meeting, I was super nervous. I hadn't seen Michelle in person since the night I left, and I didn't know how I was going to react when I saw her. I got to the cafe first. It was a Saturday afternoon, I think, and I ordered a black coffee even though I knew I wasn't going to drink it because my stomach was in knots. Michelle arrived like 10 minutes later. She looked tired and thinner than the last time I'd seen her, with her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail and no makeup, and she sat across from me without saying anything at first. We stayed silent for like a full minute, just looking at each other, until finally she started talking. She told me again that she was so sorry, that it had been the worst mistake of her life, that she never wanted to hurt me, and all those things I'd already heard in her messages, and that frankly meant nothing to me at that point. I asked her directly, "Why did you do it? Why were you with him?" And she stayed quiet thinking, and then said something about our marriage going through a difficult phase at that time. You don't know what difficult phase. I didn't remember us being bad. That Jason gave her attention when she felt ignored by me, and that it was something that just happened and got out of control. I told her, "Okay, let's say I believe it was a mistake, but why did you lie to me about Grace for 3 years? That was your conscious choice every day for 1,000 days. How do you justify that?" And that's when Michelle really started to break down. She told me that when Jason told her he wanted nothing to do with the baby, she panicked because she didn't want to be a single mother. That she thought if she told me the truth, I was going to leave her. And that she decided the best thing was to raise Grace with me and never tell me anything. I asked her, "And it never occurred to you that I had a right to know? That that child had a right to eventually know her real father? That what you were doing was wrong on so many levels I can't even enumerate them all?" Michelle just cried and said she knew, that she'd lived with that guilt every day, and that finally she couldn't take the weight of the lie anymore. I told her that it seemed very convenient to me that she decided to relieve her guilt when it was going to destroy my life, that it was incredibly selfish of her, and that I honestly didn't understand how she'd been able to look me in the eye all those years, knowing what she knew. We were like 40 minutes in that cafe, basically talking in circles because she didn't have any answer that satisfied me, and I didn't have any ability to forgive her or even feel empathy for her situation. I asked her if Jason knew about Grace now, if she'd told him he had a daughter, and she told me no, that she hadn't talked to him since they broke up. I also asked her if she was planning to look for Jason now to make him financially responsible for Grace, and she said she didn't know, that everything was very complicated, and that's when I realized she probably never considered the real consequences of telling me the truth beyond relieving her own conscience. In the end, I got up from the table, told her I had nothing more to talk about with her, to please sign the divorce papers so we could both move forward, and I left the cafe without looking back. I heard her calling after me, but I didn't stop. After that meeting, I felt a little more at peace with my decision, like it confirmed that there was no possibility of reconciliation or any explanation that would make what Michelle had done any less terrible. I told Mr. Davis to move forward with the divorce whether Michelle signed or not, and he explained that in that case we'd have to wait a bit longer, but that eventually the divorce would be approved anyway. I also made the decision to cut off contact completely with my mom and Lauren. It wasn't easy, because family is family and all that, but I realized that having them in my life was only causing me more harm. Like every conversation or message was a reminder that the people who were supposed to support me unconditionally had chosen the wrong side in this situation. About 2 months after that meeting at the cafe, I went back to work. Honestly, I didn't feel ready, but I needed to do something with my time, and I also needed the money, because being out so long had affected my finances. Although Christopher never charged me rent or anything, I still had other expenses. My coworkers noticed something had happened because obviously I'd lost like 10 kilos and looked pretty bad, but nobody asked directly what was wrong, and I appreciated that. I just focused on doing my work and keeping busy. The first few weeks were difficult because my concentration was shot, and I was making dumb mistakes on calculations I normally would have done with my eyes closed. But little by little, I was finding my rhythm again. Mr. Davis kept me updated on the progress of the divorce. Michelle finally signed the papers like 3 months after our meeting at the cafe, probably because she realized I wasn't going to change my mind, no matter how long she waited. The legal process was relatively simple in terms of dividing assets because we didn't have much. Basically, we sold the house and split the money in half, although I felt I should have gotten more, considering the circumstances, but legally, there was no case. The thing about Grace was more complicated, as Mr. Davis had predicted, because technically I'd been her legal father for 3 years. But since Michelle wasn't asking me to pay child support and I wasn't asking for custody rights either, in the end, it was left that I had no legal obligation or right over her, which was exactly what I wanted, although it also hurt in a strange way. It took like 6 more months until the divorce was completely finalized. By that point, I'd been living with Christopher for several months and had established a pretty stable routine. I'd go to work, go running some afternoons, see some friends on weekends, and basically tried to rebuild a life for myself that had nothing to do with Michelle or my family. I'm not going to lie and say I was happy or that I'd gotten over everything because that definitely wasn't the case. I still had days where I'd wake up and the first thing I thought about was Grace and how she must be doing, or I'd have moments where I'd remember something Michelle and I had done together and feel a weird mix of nostalgia and disgust. But I was better than at the beginning. At least I could function day to day without feeling like I was constantly drowning. One thing I decided to do after the divorce was finalized was move out of the city. I didn't see the point of staying in a place where every corner reminded me of my old life, where I could run into Michelle at the supermarket or where my mom and Lauren still lived. Christopher understood my decision, even though it made him sad that I was leaving, told me I'd always have a place in his apartment if I needed it, and that we should keep in touch no matter where I was. I looked for jobs in other cities and eventually got a position at an accounting firm in a smaller town, like 3 hours from where I'd lived before, a place where nobody knew me and where I could literally start from zero. I moved like 6 months ago, got a small but comfortable apartment, and have been focusing on meeting new people and developing new hobbies to fill my free time. I joined a local cycling club, started taking cooking classes on Wednesday nights because I'd never learned to cook well, and even went on a couple of dates, though nothing serious yet because honestly I don't feel ready for a relationship. Christopher visits me every month or month and a half, and we talk on the phone often. He's still my best friend and probably the only person from my old life that I kept in my current life. I haven't talked to my mom or Lauren in over a year. Sometimes I'm curious to know how they're doing or if they ever realized they were wrong to pressure me so much, but not enough to reach out to them and open that door again. Christopher told me a few months ago that my mom had called him asking about me and that he'd told her I was fine, but didn't want contact with them for now. And apparently that made her sad, but she also didn't make any real effort to apologize or acknowledge she'd handled everything wrong. Lauren hasn't tried to contact me directly either. I guess she respects my decision to cut communication, or maybe she just doesn't care enough. And Michelle, well, I don't know anything about her either. Mr. Davis told me that after the divorce was finalized, she moved to a smaller apartment with Grace, and that's all I know. I don't know if she finally looked for Jason or if she's raising Grace alone. I don't know if she told Grace about me or if she just told her that her daddy left. And honestly, I don't want to know. Sometimes I think about Grace, who must be like 4.5 now, and I wonder if she remembers me or if she's already completely forgotten me. And if someday when she's older, Michelle will tell her the truth about this whole situation. But those thoughts don't consume me like before. Now they're just like clouds that pass by once in a while and then go away. The divorce was officially finalized like 8 months ago, and legally I'm free from Michelle and that whole situation. I can't say I've healed completely or that everything is fine now, because I still carry the anger and disappointment from what happened, especially with my family. But I'm working on it. Like, I've been going to therapy for a few months, and that's helped me process everything without self-destructing in the process. My therapist says it's normal for it to take years to recover from a betrayal like this, that there's no fixed timeline for these things, and that what's important is that I keep moving forward, even if it's slow. Last week, I had a weird moment where I was at the supermarket here in my new town, and I saw a father with his young daughter, and for a second I felt that pang in my chest from remembering when I used to buy things for Grace. But instead of getting stuck in that feeling like would have happened a year ago, I just acknowledged it and moved on with my shopping. And that's enough for now, I guess.